How's it going, guys? HJ here, and I'll be showing you how to use stencils on your Vans, or any type of canvas shoe that you may have. And for your stencils, there's a positive part of your stencil, and there's a negative part of your stencil. I'm not talking about one stencil is optimistic, the other one's pessimistic, but there are actually two different parts that you can use depending on how you want to create your custom. So in this particular video here at the beginning, I'm going to show you how to use the negative part of your stencil, and then I'm actually going to switch off to another shoe, some Nikes, and show you how to use the positive part of the stencil. So here you have your stencil. If you purchased from me, thank you so much. If you didn't, that's okay. Here's the paints that I use, Angelus and Jacquard, and then I like Princeton brushes. You could use any type of brush that you'd like. This is an optional step to strain out your paint. Sometimes paint gets little teeny blobs in it, and you don't want your blobs on the shoe. So I like to strain my paint. You don't have to, but it's a step that I always like to recommend. So if the shoe's black, I recommend painting it white first and then going over it with red. Make sure to use light coats and let it dry in between. So this can take a while, but you could use a hairdryer or an embosser to speed up the drying process. Again, use light coats. You don't want it to be too thick. And then I'm going to be airbrushing this, so you can see I thin the paint, Jacquard Neopaque with Too Thin, and then here is my stencil. So this stencil is red. Normally you'll get a black one, and then you can see that clear piece over top of the stencil is the transfer paper. So you'll take your transfer paper, sticky side down, you'll put it on the stencil, and then you'll peel up both the transfer paper and the stencil, and then you will place it on your shoe and slowly remove that transfer paper. And once the transfer paper is removed, you will just have the stencil. So here, just the stencil, and I'm going to be airbrushing it. So very, very light coats with your airbrush. This can also apply for if you're hand painting. You want to do light coats, and you can use a hairdryer or a heat gun to speed up the drying process. So I'm weeding out the design right now. Another technique that you can use when you weed out your design is you can actually use a heat gun or a hairdryer to help the vinyl stencil be able to peel up a little bit easier if you'd like. Then the next step after you've weeded out your design is you can touch up any areas that you would like to. So as with any type of custom shoes, sometimes they don't come out completely perfect, so you can go ahead and you can touch up any areas that may need it. Things to keep in mind if you have hand painted it and there's a lot of bleeding underneath the stencil. So if you see a ton of paint underneath the stencil, or it just doesn't look super clean, chances are you either had the paint that was too thin, or maybe it was too thick, or it could have even been just the method of how you were painting. So keep that in mind. Very, very light coats, and try to be as controlled as possible when you are painting this. So if you got your stencils from me, thank you so much. And as you can see from this, where you're using the negative side, you will definitely want transfer paper, or I highly recommend getting transfer paper. And switching it up to another pair of shoes. So I did the negative part of the stencils on the Vans. This is using the positive part. I personally like this method much better. For me personally, it's way easier. So you could see what you like to do. So again, this is using the positive part of your stencil, and then you're just gonna place it one by one. It does take time, but it is much easier to allow the stencil to apply to the shoe rather than using the negative way. So it's totally up to you. Just wanted to show you guys this so then you can see there are two different options when using your stencils. And I have a full video up on how to customize your Nikes in particular. So with Nikes, you will need to use acetone to remove the factory finish. Here I am dyeing the thread, because a lot of times if you do not dye that thread the specific color that you're going to be painting it, it can scratch off. So you can use GAC 900, which is also known as Too Soft, with your paint, or you can use water and paint. For personal reasons, health reasons, I use water and paint to dye my threading. And if you did see my other video, this is just a repeat. For this, I'm airbrushing it. I'm doing very light coats. I'm drying the paint in between coats. So this method still can apply for when you hand paint your shoes. Very, very light coats. When you go over top of the stencil, make sure that you are very careful. If you're hand painting it and you just, scribble all over it with your paintbrush, it's going to bleed underneath the stencil. We don't want that. So you have to be very delicate when you do go over top the stencil with your paintbrush. Same thing with your airbrush, very, very light coats. And again, let it dry in between layers. It took me maybe about 5 layers to do this, but everyone is different depending on how thick or light of coats you're doing. Again, go with the light coats. And after your shoes are completely dry, you can go ahead and weed out the design. So I'm using a weeding tool. You can also use a thicker needle is one option that a lot of people like to use. A thick needle, a very long needle. You could get it at Hobby Lobby, Michael's, different craft stores like that. Or you can always use your X-Acto knife to weed out the design. And then I also like to sometimes heat up the stencil with my heat gun, with my embosser, just to help it peel off a little bit easier. So you can check out the other video that I did where I'll go into more details on these Nikes, but this was using the positive part of your stencil. You could also use the negative part of your stencil. I think positive is much easier, but it's totally up to you. Do what you feel works best. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Like and subscribe if this was helpful, and let me know what you'd like to see next. You can always purchase your stencils, your decals, possibly custom shoes in the future at aceartistry.com. And if you're still watching this video, you're awesome. Here are some other videos relating to stenciling, so check them out. Chances are, if I didn't answer a question on this video, probably answered it on these videos linked. So thanks so much for watching. Enjoy and happy creating.